notices that when you switch from nose breathing to mouth breathing, within 30 seconds, your grip fails. What I started to realize was that the breath was more important to me mechanically than it was physiologically. When we strike to really keep those positions relative to each other, we see improved power, improved ventilation, improved aerobic efficiency, right? And the rest of the things start to matter. So there's a lot of cues around efficiency and around how your brain is particularly protecting your body and allowing you to generate force by how in control and how effective your ventilation mechanism is. Because a breath hold that's not conscious, but a breath hold that's in reaction to pain or poor positioning is how your brain is trying to stabilize the system and to create artificial stability so that you can solve a problem. Great for your brain, less effective when you're on your mountain bike climbing a steep hill. And that's where I want people to see is that your breathing is a movement we should be training, just like your foot pressure, just like your overhead position, just like bending your arms early on a snatch.
Einen sonnigen guten Tag und willkommen zu The Art of Fitness, deinem Podcast, bei dem es darum geht, zentrale Fragen und Ideen aus den Bereichen Fitnesstraining, Mindset, Ernährung und Regeneration auf den Punkt zu bringen, um dir auch zu mentaler Hypertrophie zu verhelfen und deinen Weg zum mitdenkenden Athleten zu begleiten. Hey guys, I'm more than happy that today's episode is with one of my biggest idols and my biggest heroes within the functional fitness community. We are talking to Dr. Kelly Starrett. He's a coach, physical therapist, and two-time New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. That includes his books, which have become kind of a Bible to most of our functional training coaches. Becoming a Supple Leopard, Ready to Run, and Desk-Bound. Kelly is also a speaker and he's a co-founder of The Ready State, which started out in 2008 as Mobility WOD. He has worked with clients including professional athletes from the NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB, but also world and national record holding Olympic lifters, Olympic gold medalists, Tour de France cyclists, CrossFit Games medalists, belly dancers, military personnel, and competitive age division athletes. In short, he is the godfather of mobility within our functional fitness community and beyond this community. So it would actually be natural to talk to Kelly about, well, mobility, I guess. But it's totally not what we're doing. I came to realize that he lately said he's not coaching posture anymore, but rather breathing. So I was more interested in topics like, why do they think do we move backwards in fitness, and what's the next stage in fitness? How does breathing actually connect to applying power and strength and optimizing human potential? How does it influence our performance overall? And why is mouth breathing a sign of losing choice? And how does that connect to low back pain, which more than 80% of our population are regularly experiencing? We will also get to know why Kelly Starrett is a fan of e-bikes to optimize human potential. And of course, we will get a hint on how to start properly breathing to optimize our own potential and our own physical performance. So, well, I only have to say, enjoy the show. It's full of knowledge. So, well, thanks again for coming on the podcast and making time for us. I really
Absolutely pleasure. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. What are your travel plans to Garmisch this year?
Oh man, we are hoping to end up there for the New Year's, for the holidays and New Year's, for winter break. We're Europe optimists. I just saw an article in the New York Times saying that I think the EU will accept vaccinations and negative tests. So, this is the longest I haven't been in Europe in like 10 years. It's crazy. So
And really,
so I think we're going to try to buy a car and leave it in Munich so that
right.
we always have a car when we come back. And then ultimately we're going to create the James Bond MI6 layer with skis and, and bikes and a car. You come right from the airport, you go to the garage where your car is, and then everything is there and ready to go. This is our dream for, taking over Europe.
Awesome. So you got to buy a bully then. Or
Exactly.
it's basically weird to say it in English because bully has a very different meaning in English.
It's slightly different meaning, but this is our goal. And it's fun. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to coach in Tennessee with Rich Froning, one of his camps, and half of the direct messages that came through that weekend were, "Why is no one wearing a mask?" And I'm like, "Look, I'm vaccinated. We're in a huge gym. There's lots of air. People can make choices about their safety." And the other half were, "What's it like to be around people and to coach? I'm so jealous." And I suspect we are moving towards the roaring 20s again. It's going to be crazy. And especially in fitness and strength and conditioning, I think we've all come to realize that the magic is being with other people. The magic is being in the room, to have someone coach you, to get that unconditional positive regard. Zoom exercise at home will always be a poor substitute for what it means to be with a group of people trying to, become secret ninjas.
Absolutely. That's it.
So I can't wait to travel again. Can't wait to see my coach friends again.
Yeah, you finally got
And
to show off as well, don't you?
that's right. And then I've been working, and then I've already planned a trip to Africa to go kayaking the Zambezi River in Zambia in September. So, all I have to do now is I have something to train for, travel, and this has been one of the ways in which I've really helped myself cope during this time, is to give myself these things to live for, goals, so that I had something to do a little bit. I think, sometimes training can be a little bit recursive. It just feels like I do more pull-ups so I can do more pull-ups, or I'm
Yeah.
deadlifting so I can have a bigger deadlift. And we always lose what the most important thing is, which is the context. We're training for something. And sometimes I think COVID took away the something.
Well, it definitely did. Yeah. I mean, I'm absolutely happy that I live in Bavaria, in Munich, actually. So I can just go out and use my fitness. Just go on the mountains, go on a skiing tour, go snowboarding. Well, I'm not into kayaking, but I could do that here as well.
Yeah, because I grew up in Garmisch, as you know, context for me was always about, we define the best athlete as the person who could do all the sports the best. So
Yeah.
who was the best ski racer? Who was the best mountain biker? Who was the best in the mountains? Who was the best kayaker? Who played the best football? And what was great about that is that it really created us to be savage generalists. We were so competent, and we naturally had a periodicity where, like everyone else, of course, who has had this experience, we were done with ski season when ski season was over. Like, we didn't want to see the skis again, and then, it's time to play, football. And then it's, time to be on the bikes and race, and, and so much, I think that initially in our age, we all probably could have used a little bit more formal training at the time.
Sure.
You know, um, Functional training was new. I remember going to an Austrian ski camp in Austria with Andre Arnold, who was the World Cup winner, and we did a bunch of testing, and we played games, indoor soccer, and we rode bikes, and there was very little formal movement. There was lots of play, which is important. But I wonder if we had just had a little more Olympic lifting, a little bit of kettlebells, a little bit more training, how much better we could have been. And now what I'm realizing is that all the kids who come through do not have this exposure, this generalism exposure to multiple sports, always playing, and we had to ride our bikes to the soccer match. We had to ride our bikes to, it was always context. And so we had these big bases. And now we're seeing that kids don't have that necessarily. And we have to do so much more formal movement teaching. It's more important now than it ever has been before. So, like in the back of my mind, I realized early on with CrossFit, for example, the CrossFit was such a fun way to train for my sport because it didn't eat up hours and hours in the gym.
Right.
I could get in and out. I could make real progress. I could touch different energy systems and different positions and different skills. It was real skill based, and then I could still have enough energy to go do a sport. And what has happened in the current iteration of functional training and gym culture is that we spend so much time in the gym and we're training so hard that there's no time to go also play a game of soccer at the end, or go ski tour, or go into the mountains, because that's what you've done. And so if you can't do those things, then yes, the training in the gym can be totalitarian. But it's easy to forget the reason why we're training. And the reason why we're training is to go so that we can be more durable and more explosive and have more fun and surf more waves than anyone else. And this is, I think we're starting to shift back a little bit towards, hey, why do I have all this fitness if I don't go spend it a little bit,
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. If I say use your fitness.
Really resonates with me. 2 weeks ago, there was a river that was running here. It's the North Fork of the American River, and it's this class 5 river, class 4, class 5, and it's a big, long day. We were on the river for 7 hours, and it starts with an hour hike down into the canyon with your boat on a rope on your shoulder, scrambling. And so you have to be very fit to get to the river. And then you have to have enough fitness and skill and management of energy systems and food and hydration and staying warm and battling the elements and scouting to go run the river and then still drive home. And, it's a big day, and it's a nice test of the integration of your fitness. And when I mean that, I mean, how skilled are you at managing your energy? Are you eating enough? Are you drinking enough? Are you staying warm enough? Are you able to stay focused? Did that hike down destroyed some of the people we were with? And I was like, what do you mean that destroyed you? So I think what's really interesting for me these days are great tests of fitness, and some of the European, the last time I was in Garmisch, there was this incredible ultra run in the mountains, like 100K. And man, you had to climb the Kandahar, and you had to go up, over the Alpspitz, and man, it was so legit, and people are so fast. And I think that readiness fitness, I think we can say, hey, you probably are strong enough. Let's go be skilled, or let's go build a big aerobic engine, or let's go work on positions, or let's go pick up new sports. And, I think we couldn't have that conversation 15 years ago because no one was very strong. No one was very fit. We really weren't. We thought we were, but we weren't. And now we are. And so it's a very exciting time, I think, for us to have the next conversation about durability and fitness as application towards something that matters. So venture fitness is what we call it.
That's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very big community over here to see all the fitness applied to the outdoors.
Yes.
Unfortunately, from my point of view, in Germany, we see a lot of people just do the outdoor sport, and not care about their bodies outside of the skiing piste or whatever else they're doing. So as soon as they get off their mountain bike or off their skis, they often just do nothing until they get back on it.
A little bit of Saufen, a little bit of that's right. What's interesting though is I agree with you. Culturally, that ends up being sort of a limitation. But I'd put it on us to say we haven't made the case necessarily that it means that you can ski longer, you can ski better, you can have less knee pain, less back pain. I think we need to do, it's more incumbent on us to explain why the minimum is the dose. And I think it's confusing when you see powerlifters and Olympic lifters, because you're like, that's like, I'm going to kill that guy on the climb. Like he's too heavy for this mountain bike. I mean, I experienced this a little bit, that, I'm the big at 108 kilos, I'm a huge man, and I have to put out big watts to keep up with my little, 80 kilo friends or 60 kilo friends. And, so on the one hand, I think we have to make the case for it by saying that when we see people who are engaged in the right amount of training, which of course is going to change during the week and during the month and during the season, but those people make such a compelling reason to be more durable, to be more fit, to be more powerful, to be more explosive, to have more fun, that people are like, hey, I want some of that, right? Versus you need to do this, otherwise you won't be good on the piste. And you're like, well, I'm pretty good on the piste already. So what are you talking about, right? So I think we're starting to get there a little bit. And my watchword for 2020 or 2019 was, my phrase was, I was like, the glacial pace, the Gletscherzeit, right, was so slow, and this is as fast as we can go.
Right. That's a good analogy for sure. Well, you said you wanted to talk about like kind of the next stage in fitness as well. And I came to realize, especially on your virtual mobility coach, that you started to talk a lot more about breathing than about anything else. And what really struck me was, I think the way you put it was that strengths can only be applied if I can breathe in a position. Anything else is just kind of flexibility. So just getting into the position, but not being able to apply power and breathe there. So basically, my main topic for today is to pick your brain on breathing.
Oh, fantastic. I think sometimes people ask me, what did you miss, or what would you go back and highlight again? And I actually went back. I started teaching the course, our original course, in 2008.
Yeah.
And I have a section in there on breathing, about how we'd use it to downregulate or to get a little bit more parasympathetic. But I don't think we all appreciated so much how our athletes were going from breath hold to breath hold,
Mm-hmm.
and how much we could influence the brain, and how much, the physiology of the breathing was important. And again, I'm a classically trained physiotherapist, and I've worked in the hospital, and I've worked in the intensive care units, and I understand all the downstream compensations of poor breathing or shallow breathing, or, of scrubbing off all your CO2, or working with people who have, cancer and have COPD. But what I realized was that many times it's difficult for us to define what is a great position for people. And because part of that is that we get caught into the language of posture. And posture is a really colloquial term. It's a term of the people. It's non-specific. And then the professionals come in and they say things like, well, posture doesn't matter. And I'm like, well, it does matter. If you want to go fast, if you want to transfer energy, if you want to breathe effectively, if you don't want to grind your teeth, if you want to turn your head or rotate, all of these things matter. And so when we started to use breathing, and originally my exposure to breathing came through working with Laird Hamilton and Gabrielle Reese in the pool, which came from sort of their physical application of this dynamic pool training, but came from Wim Hof, right? Wim gets everyone interested. It's really important that we acknowledge that obviously Oxygen Advantage has been around for a minute with Traco, of course, but Wim really captured everyone's imagination and said, hey, there's some physiology here that we could pay attention to, and ways that we could, tap into our nervous system. But what I started to realize was that the breath was more important to me mechanically than it was physiologically. And don't get me wrong, because, I've been probably into this really dedicated breath training for 6 or 7 years, where yesterday, it's a recovery day. My wife is taking off. We go into the sauna for 30 minutes. We're sweating. And then I went for a hike afterwards, right? But during that hike, I did all kinds of breath holds, where I take a 10-second inhale and I'm walking and I hold my breath as long as I can, recover through my nose. And so while I'm walking, I'm obsessing over CO2 tolerance. I'm suffering, like being a highly anaerobic. I'm just dying and like shivering and shaking on the trail, feeling I'm going to pee myself. And so I work the breathing into a lot of the things we do. But what I didn't realize was, of course, we could see improvements in VO2 max. So I'm able to push 90% of my max heart rate now, only nose breathing, which is pretty amazing, that I can get my heart rate so high and still be that effective with my nose, right? My breathing mechanics are very efficient. So that just means aerobic efficiency is better, right? That's very interesting, because suddenly from the physiology, I'm able to tap into a lot more of the red blood cells, right? This high CO2 tolerance means that I can strip off more oxygen off the hemoglobin. That's interesting, of course. But what I started to realize was that we were all missing this idea that we could use our ability to find a position where we can ventilate, to take a breath powerfully, maximally, as a choice about what is a better shape that maintains the most physiology. So if I put you on the bike in a time trial position and you can't breathe very effectively there, that's a terrible position for you because I've just taken the carburetor and shut it down, or you're in a shape where you can't, you're flexed, or you can't take a powerful breath. And so we end up missing a lot of the potential of the human being by not paying attention to how effective we can ventilate in these positions. And what's interesting, of course, is that people have been talking about this forever, that the first diaphragm is the top of the mouth. The second diaphragm is the diaphragm. The third diaphragm is the pelvic floor. And the last diaphragm is really the arches of your feet. And what we start to see is that when those things are in line, as much as we can, based on the task, when we strike to really keep those positions relative to each other, we see improved power, improved ventilation, improved aerobic efficiency, right? And the rest of the things start to matter. So if you are slouched through your shoulders, that's fine. It may not cause problems to your upper back. But if you can't put your arms over your head and you can't take a breath there, then what I say to myself is maybe that's not as effective a position, right? It doesn't transfer. It doesn't give you as many movement options. And so when we started layering in the breathing, we could also use it as an idea of, hey, I see that you're in a position, and as you put some pressure on your quadriceps, the first thing that went was your breathing. Or you went on your T-spine, and the first thing that went was your breathing. And if we look and come back to the definition of functional movement, we work in a wave of contraction from trunk to sleeve, from core to extremity. This is how everyone defines good movement. And if you read a book like The Spinal Engine, right, Grakovetsky, then what you'll start to see is, well, the spine is the first engine. It really is a mechanism by which we can create force and transmit force. And so if that engine is not, braced is the wrong word, we like the word organized. If you can get that engine into a better midline position, it's more effective. The abs are stronger, the rectors are stronger, the diaphragm is stronger, the pelvic floor works. You start really seeing an upregulation in the whole function of the being. And the easiest way for us to decide whether or not your nervous system is trying to protect you or how well you're able to move the first engine, because movement is the game. Well, it turns out being able to ventilate in those positions really works. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I want you to breathe casually when you have a heavy, 200 kilos on your back. But when you have 200 kilos on your back at the top, I still want you to be able to take the maximum breath you can in there. And what we've been seeing is, for example, is that we see people do multiple reps, more than 5 reps. They do 10 pull-ups. And what really fatigues them at the end is that they've run out of air because they're not breathing between reps. And so what we've discovered is that when we go back into and look at the best athletes, we'll see that Kipchoge ran sub 2 hours breathing through his nose. That's interesting. That Conor McGregor fought Floyd Mayweather, and as soon as his mouth was open, he started to gasp, we were like, oh, the fight is over, and then he lost, right? And so there's a lot of cues around efficiency and around how your brain is particularly protecting your body and allowing you to generate force by how in control and how effective your ventilation mechanism is. And so when we started to really pay attention, what we noticed was that this over-breathing, mouth breathing was really a sign of someone who didn't have choice. And so what we've been striving to do is return choice back to the athlete. Well, it turns out, of course, that if someone has low back pain, one of the first ways that we can change how the brain is perceiving the back is by rewiring the movement. And we do rewire the movement through breathing. And of course, breathing helps to desensitize. Breathing helps to circulate lymph and move and decongest the belly. And suddenly when you understand that, you understand what the dragon breath was in yoga, like, ha, 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 ha. Yeah, let's fire up that diaphragm, but also let's pump all the crap out of your legs and out of your trunk and move that lymph around and get the organs moving. And so what I think is amazing is that when we look at breathing, it's the first movement. And what we've suddenly realized is, man, we can actually improve people's total volume. We can improve their VO2 max. We can improve their ability to pressurize. We can desensitize when they have back pain and make them feel better. And so why wouldn't we start to think about that as the through narrative for everything that we're doing, so that we're not just doing more compensation? because a breath hold that's not conscious, but a breath hold that's in reaction to pain or poor positioning is how your brain is trying to stabilize the system and to create artificial stability so that you can solve a problem. Great for your brain, less effective when you're on your mountain bike climbing a steep hill.
That's for sure true, yeah. So did I get it right that, well, you said breathing is the first movement, probably because we do need to breathe, obviously, in order to stay alive. But what I don't really get is why is it, or what is it that is so important? Like, what is the logic behind start breathing correctly as an athlete? What basically makes my performance better? Is it more oxygen assumption? Is it something else that changes mechanically with the diet?
I think I really like what you're saying there, because, you know, so many times, especially in this very new era of sports science, I think we have been obsessed with humans going fast and lifting heavy things forever. I mean, there are pictures of Chinese lifters lifting stones, training in the military, that are 3,000 years old, right? So we're not the first people. You know, Alexander was in Afghanistan 50 years before the birth of Christ. Like, so there have been humans. The story of Genghis Khan, you know, is really an interesting one, because his soldiers marched on milk and meat and fat, and they could go days without eating, and they had really good health. And the other armies that marched on wheat and grains had tooth rot and vitamin C deficiencies, and they had these wagon trains. And so you're like, humans have been paying attention to this for a long time. So I just want to start with that assumption. And then I also want to just say that as our modern selves, we always want the thing, right? We want like, what is it, this thing? And what I would suggest is, I would point to you to one of my heroes, is a guy named Thomas Myers, who wrote this amazing book about fascia called Anatomy Trains. And if there's someone who's the godfather of fascia, it's certainly Thomas Myers, getting us to understand that fascia is the meridians they talk about in Chinese medicine. Fascia is why you suddenly understand certain yoga positions and the springiness. I mean, the whole body does not work without this fascial connection. But he pointed out that, hey, if you change the fascia, which is highly innervative, has a lot of nerves, is responsible for a lot of information that your brain is perceiving, if you change some aspect of that, what is it? Is it the hydration? Is it the improved mechanical efficiency? Is it the springiness? Is it messing with the tensegrity? You know, is it downregulating nociception that your brain is interpreting? It doesn't matter. He's like, look, it can be happening all simultaneously. So when we focus and say, hey, look, I'm working with a guy named Wes Kitts, who is going to be our Olympian heavyweight in Olympic lifting. Mm-hmm. And I started with him a couple years ago because he was at the Pan Am Games. He received a heavy clean and then passed out backwards. Like, he fell over and blacked out, which is not the way to win a competition.
Not really.
Right? So what we worked on was him getting more air in moments where he could pressurize. So what you'll see is that Wes doesn't miss a jerk anymore. He doesn't miss it because he's able to take this huge breath, and a conscious huge breath, so that when he dips and drives, he's at peak intra-abdominal pressure and peak stability through his trunk. And he's able to do that by creating high intra-abdominal forces. So for a guy like Wes, being able to pressurize makes it so that he's able to maintain the integrity of his nervous system, which is why the nervous system works the way it does, right? Why the musculature of the trunk is what Philip Beach describes as a radial contractile field. The whole thing squeezes towards the center on an exhale to maintain, or a stiffness, right? And an exhale, creating stiffness is an exhale without exhaling, which allows us to create higher pressures and maintain the integrity of the nervous system. So suddenly you realize that, man, when people like Greg Cook, who are doing some functional assessment training, notices that when you switch from nose breathing to mouth breathing, within 30 seconds, your grip fails. I think that's very interesting, because what you're not able to do through mouth breathing is create the same kind of abdominal pressure that you can when you're breathing under tension in and out and in and out. And so your nervous system says, oh, we don't have the same integrity. Let's downregulate how much force you can protect. Well, suddenly Again, if we're a cyclist and I can get you to breathe more effectively, then you may have better oxygen, access to oxygen, and your mechanics are more effective. It actually costs you less to breathe out, and there's more air moving in instead of that super shallow breath. So to answer your question, I suspect it's working on many ways. We incorporate the breathing. So when I went to PT school, physio school, my school was attached to the Center for PNF, the World Center for PNF, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, which means how do we get the body to feel and perceive to facilitate change? That's movement change. Like that's what PNF is at the heart. And if you've ever done a contract and a relax on a mobilization ball or in a stretch, that's PNF. That's a tiny sliver, like a 1% of what PNF is. But I started to realize that, for example, when we started to really integrate breathing into the concepts of PNF, we were able to make sure that people own that position by breathing maximally, so that if they were in a flex position or had their arms over their head, they were training their bodies and training their brains to say, no, here's the top end of the breath here. So what we ended up doing is just to practice. Like, can you breathe in this position? You're telling your nervous system, yes, this is green lights. It's safe. Why? Because we're breathing here and nothing bad happens to you when you're breathing. You'll see that, if you're holding your breath, it's because something serious is happening. And not only that, but we trained and found positions in the trunk that were maybe under tension and that you just didn't have access to. So, we do a lot of grabbing people and just giving them awareness, a little feedback. If you take a voodoo floss band and tie it around your waist, you'll suddenly start to breathe more effectively laterally. It's because you're getting some tactile input. So, the idea here is, how can we improve and get more work done quickly? Well, it turns out if you took that 4-second inhale, then we did an isometric for 4 seconds under high tension, the brain was like, oh, we're doing work now. And then a long, slow exhale, trying to exhale for 8 seconds, really helped us to tell the brain through this practice that this was a non-threatening place. And B, that downregulation that happens with the nervous system on those long exhales is equally as powerful. So if we're trying to make change in tissues, you can't just roll around going from breath hold to breath hold because it's too painful. You're actually working too deep. You're telling yourself this is a threat, there's too much pain, versus these long, discrete breaths, isometric holds, long exhales. And we found that we had much better outcomes in changing people's pain and their tissue range of motion and helping them relax.
So does that only apply to mobility work then? So breathing more deeply, or does that apply to, let's say, lifting as well?
Well, I think it applies to lifting in so much that when we see people pressurized at the bottom of a power clean or deadlift, usually it's an afterthought. It's a half breath.
Right.
And one of the things that we're trying to do with our complex movements is that there's enough variability and every time you step up to the barbell, you're a different person than you were yesterday.
Right.
Like, you've changed, you've grown, you're older, you're sleep deprived. And part of the magic is a good warm up is for you to find out who you are today when you reach to the barbell, because you're a different person. And theoretically, you're stronger and your fascia's changed and you're stiff or not stiff, right? I don't know what the strain is going at home. But as we lift or teaching people complex skills, we're trying to reduce movement variability. And you lifting on a full breath versus lifting on a half breath is very different in terms of the pressures you can create, the leverages you can create, the mechanical stability that your nervous system will allow you to generate. One of the reasons I'm such a fan of kettlebells and I'm such a fan of Olympic style weightlifting is those are all done with speed, and you cannot cheat a poor position with speed. You can cheat a poor position, and I mean you can get into some terrible positions under low load or high load, low speed. So if you look at the deadlifting in the world, the physios like to say, see, rounding your back is safe. And I'm like, yeah, that's safe. That's true. No one died in this lifting, but it's a terrible position. It doesn't transfer. You can't take a good breath here. And it's only a position that can happen under very low loads. Mm-hmm. High speed, the nervous system says, nope, that speed component is squared. Force is mass times acceleration. And the acceleration factor is squared. So it's really important. So when you add speed to that, the forces on the tissues are really tremendous. And what we see is that if you try to move quickly, with a less effective position, you can't generate as much force. When you move quickly with a good position, you can generate more force. So one of the reasons I love the kettlebells and I love the barbell at speed is that it really tells us this is effective and translates or it doesn't. And it does so with a mislift or a failure, or you drop the bar or something. And one of the things that we see is we try to eliminate the number of variables, that if we can get people to be more consistent in how they pressurize, we see that we're able to reduce the amount of variability and increase the sympathetic output. So remember that in the middle of the T-spine, you have this thing called the sympathetic chain ganglia, which is part of the reason why you have these huge pressure systems in the middle of your spine, in your back. And they, account for a lot of slack in the nervous system. But when you put those things under pressure, deep pressure, they allow you to have more sort of neuro output to the tissues, which means you can generate more force on a breath hold, right? This is why you ki when you punch someone, because that exhale allows you to have better sympathetic outflow so you can punch more effectively or kick more effectively. And again, one of the things that we're seeing is we see a lot of variability where people receive a clean and they haven't taken a big breath and they can't take another big breath because they haven't trained for that. And so what we're seeing is that we're not really testing someone's limits of their physiology. We're testing the limits of their ability to pressurize, which is not the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
So
yeah.
check this out. Next time you're skiing on the slopes, right? Watch how you breathe. Most skiers are going from breath hold to breath hold to breath hold.
Yeah.
And watch that you need to be able to breathe and ventilate effectively. Listen to your breathing and you'll be shocked that you are a highly aerobic athlete who doesn't breathe. You basically get to the bottom of the hill and you're breathing hard because you're not breathing like an aerobic sport, going from isometric to isometric. So you have to figure out when to breathe, and you should probably be breathing on every turn, just like our Olympic sprinters are trying to breathe every stroke or every other stroke, right? Versus right? That's not very effective at solving this problem mechanically. And so when we start to put that breath in there, what we realize is that it gives your brain some place to focus, and that there's a lot more potential in what you're doing, and that you are artificially limited because no one has said that this is important.
That's a great one. I'm a huge fan of simplifying things in getting the point across. So could we say, like, if I imagine I want to get the point of why do I need to pay attention to my breathing across to a newbie in the box, or let's say a meathead who I want to become a newbie in the box, could you put it as simply as that? If you pay attention to your breathing, you can downregulate kind of the stress symptoms in your body, and therefore kind of tell the body, hey dude, this is safe. It's a safe position to be in. You are allowed to exempt more force. So I can actually say to the athlete, hey, you can produce more power eventually because your brain is not tricked, but actually it releases power because it's in less stress. Is that correct?
I think that's part of it. I think that's one aspect that's really important. I think what we want to say is, if we're going to tap into your potential as an athletic person, and more importantly, apply these lessons outside the gym, because I think one of the things that has happened is that, one of the things that I have seen, for example, so when I teach, I'll teach a skill and then I apply the skill immediately, and no one ever connects the dots on the skill. I'm like, okay, we can breathe, now get into a plank position.
Yeah.
So just all this breathing work, and then I just change what the brain is thinking about, change the focus, change the awareness, breathing goes away. And I'm like, so what were we doing there? Was that just all bullshit? And people are like, oh, and I'm like, no, don't worry. It's not your fault. It's the coach's fault for not connecting the next skill. Okay, we've practiced the breathing. So now see if you can maintain that breathing while you're in a plank. And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. We can do all of this yoga breathing on our backs, get all high and Wim Hof and all luminous, and then put someone in a plank and they immediately stop breathing, right? Because it's a lot easier to hold the plank when your nervous system or your breath volume is acting as a splint. You just pumped up the air tube and now it's stiffer, right? So what you're really seeing is that you're training yourself anytime you're in this position. So now you're swimming, you've trained yourself to breathe or not breathe. And so one of the things that we see is, hey, I need you to maintain this breathing skill under these low load thresholds. There's definitely a time to hold your breath and then repressurize and then repressurize. But even that repressurization should come back to maximum, right? So if I'm going from breath hold to breath hold, I want to be able to get back under big loads. And then more importantly, if I don't need maximal loads, I want to be able to ventilate in those positions. So one of the things then, if we take that a step further, is that we're not only not connecting the skills between why we're training, and this is why I'm so agnostic about the tools you train. I'm look, the stimulus is the same. If you like to move, sandbags, we're basically Olympic lifting with sandbags. If you like to move kettlebells, it's Olympic lifting with kettlebells. If you like to use logs, it's the same. The stimuluses are the same, right? The tool is different. But what we need to do is then take the next step and say, the reason we teach break the bar, spread the bar, is that when you tackle, for example, your elbows will be in and your shoulders are protected, and it's more effective technique. Mm-hmm. And so what we want people to do is to translate why we're doing things in the gym under deep learning principles, because those principles translate to better sports economy, sports fitness power. And I think the problem is if you don't ever take the athlete out of the gym and they can't connect the dots. And what we've just been saying to athletes for a long time is strength just solves all problems. Just get stronger, just get fitter. And at some point I'm like, well, is that really the limiting factor? Just my strength? Because I see kids playing on the playground all the time and they're not very strong, right? So, the key here for us is to continue to understand that why we're in the gym, it teaches principles of how to create stable shoulders, of more mechanical efficiency when you're swimming, or you jump into yoga class and all of a sudden you're more stable because you understand the principles of what we're trying to do there around maintaining foot pressure or your arch. We have a lot of athletes. We talk about foot pressure as much as we talk about breathing, like foot pressure, foot pressure, foot pressure. And when our athletes go and surf or they go snowboard or they go ski, they're like, man, it's so easy. And I'm like, isn't it weird how you've worked obsessively on foot pressure? Then when you're loading the ski in cross country, that you have a flat foot and you're getting better power. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, it's so weird. When you jump and land, you can, cut more effectively. So, we want our athletes to be able to move beyond we don't know what the physiology is, but just more of everything. That was our old concept. Just do more work, more work, more work, more work. It will protect you. And what we've realized is that when we do a better job of connecting the skills, then people go out and they're like, oh my gosh, my running was so much better because I was able to ventilate more effectively and more efficiently. And I was thinking about it, so it wasn't the limiting, or I was able to pressurize more effectively in the turn, or right, et cetera, et cetera. Or I was able to sprint on the bike and recover better. Mm-hmm. And those things become much more interesting conversations because, again, I think we've been, low hanging fruit is still fruit.
That absolutely is. Yeah. Not a bad one, is it?
No, I'll take all the low hanging fruit. I mean, sometimes the fruit is so low that I look like a genius. And people are like, what happened? And I'm like, dude, we just did the basics. Your brain is so smart and it picks up the skills. But really, we want to appreciate, one of my current heroes is a coach named Franz Bosch, mm-hmm. right? And he's written a couple books. The last one is Anatomy of Agility. One of the things that he is really clever to say, there's two things I think is important around Franz Bosch's work. He has a statement that says there's more variation in waltzing than there is in sprinting, mm-hmm. which means that at low load and low intensities, you can pretty much do anything you want. Your body is really tolerant. And, maybe when you're 80, you'll have a bunion on your toe, or you'll be that little bent over grandma on her bike, but that's when you're 80, right? You can get away with a lot. But if you want to go fast, if you want to go far, if you want to be powerful, if you want to win, if you want to be effective and more efficient, then what we end up seeing is that all of the best body practices look alike. And really the only difference between you and me is the length of my torso, the length of your femurs, how wide your pelvis is. Those are our signatures of movement. Not you have a unique way of deadlifting and I have a unique way of deadlifting. The forces of the body are universal when we grab the bar, right? The principles are the same. The application is I'm a truck, you're a car. We drive a little bit differently, but the steering wheel works the same, the brakes work the same, gravity works the same, inertia works the same, friction works the same. And so what we want to appreciate is that as we start to go faster, we start to see unification of these principles. And secondarily, one of my critiques of the sort of functional fitness space is we see a lot of corrective exercise, which is very low level and doesn't arrive to a certain level where the brain takes it seriously. It's just busy work.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're looking for is load and intensity and duration and demand, that the brain has to do some deep learning in these positions. And then that learned skill, learned position transfers over. So that's really, so that really is the goal, is to try to have a training stimulus that's sufficiently robust, the brain pays attention to it and starts to relearn. And ultimately, everything that we're doing in the gym is really about motor learning and changing of behaviors. Where if we really get into the bottom of this, we're changing a breathing behavior, which is no different than changing the way you learn how to do math or learn how to think or have positive self-talk. Behavior is behavior. Well, it's a physical behavior or an internal mental behavior, the behaviors are the same. And this is why it's so difficult to get people to stop eating sugar or to self-soothe. These behaviors get set up. And what we're trying to do is rewire behavior. So we better have an input that is sufficiently robust. The brain thinks, hey, I have to pay attention to this. And sometimes very low level, corrective exercise movements don't arrive to that. Yes, we will load the tendons. Yes, we will move through a full range of motion. But it's why yogis don't necessarily always make the best athletes, right? It's not under load and under speed.
Mm-hmm. So does it need to be a high load and a high speed just to do that, or just
relative to the body, right? Or high arousal? Your brain has to think it's serious enough to pay attention to it versus to be amused, And so what we see is a lot of these internal external rotation exercises they give are really babysitting tendons, right? While the body is healing, we're just getting some movement in so we can pump out congestion and get a little load. But that doesn't change how effectively you can create a stable shoulder when you're swimming or when you're snatching or swinging kettlebell or tackling or running or sprinting. The brain doesn't connect those two dots effectively enough.
Okay, fair enough. I can really imagine how that breathing, and especially nose breathing, works on the extremes. Like we've been talking about Kipchoge, who was running the marathon, I think, just nose breathing. And you've also talked about the power lifter or Olympic lifter on the other hand. So these are the two extremes. But does it also work, let's say, in the CrossFit workout, which is probably very more complex in movement? So not monostructural or just one repetition, but many repetitions over a high intensity and longer period of time.
Well, let me ask you this. If you were missing hip extension or hip shoulder internal rotation, these are big deficits that we see in our athletic populations, would that cost you mechanical efficiency over time? Yes.
Sure.
Yes. So when we see people, in the first minute, everyone is always the same in the workout, right? We see it. Everyone is the same. Everyone's very fit and very strong. But what we're really looking at is what happens to the degradation of the system. So poor breathing mechanics or less consciousness or untrained breathing leads a lot of potential on the table for our athletes to recover faster, to get their heart rates down between movements, to recover more quickly, to, again, even just pull off more oxygen. If the goal, if we're redlining, then I'm theoretically maximizing my oxygen uptake. Mm-hmm. But if my CO2 is relatively low because I'm over breathing and I've never trained my brainstem to be able to handle higher CO2 levels, then I'm not actually able to desaturate. I'm not able to actually pull the oxygen off of the hemoglobin. So even though I'm redlined and feeling like I'm dying, my oxygen saturation, my SaO2, may only be 95 or 94. And yet someone who has very adept at handling high CO2 levels because they don't overbreathe and they're breathing more effectively, they have a lot more internal pain, we'll just put that in quotation marks, relative comfort. The brainstem says, oh, we're totally fine here. And so, because remember, it's CO2 that triggers breathing.
Mhm.
So what we're able to do is have much higher CO2 levels in the blood. We're able to get more oxygen off the hemoglobin. That leaves you up for getting back to the pull-up bar or doing another set of burpees more effectively. And if you watch actually people do burpees and watch how effectively they breathe, you're going to see that they are just breathing like they're in gulag, that they're breathing like it doesn't matter. And what you realize is, man, there's a whole lot of efficiency here, especially since, remember, my hypothesis is I'm doing burpees so it translates to something else, right? In this situation, I'm putting myself under duress so I can have a globally extended spine, flex the spine, land with my feet flat, right? Practice my ventilation so that those skills transfer over on the pitch. They transfer over on the bike. And that's where I want people to see is that your breathing is a movement we should be training, just like your foot pressure, just like your overhead position, just like bending your arms early on a snatch. And we should see those things as equivalents. And what we end up doing is we end up measuring a lot of force output versus with time on a system that has been highly restricted and undertrained because no one has valued this. And it's easy to work in. If you're a coach, I love to put people on the bikes. I'm just a big fan of the bike. It's high physiology, very low skill. Everyone can bike. No one's going to die. Their backs aren't going to explode. And so during warm-ups, or even with jump roping, I'll have people do breath holds where I'm practicing getting them into this panicky phase and getting really comfortable under conditions where there's no movement skill, devolved, right? Where we don't have to have the brain compete for new attention. So we work on breathing obsessively, or we'll finish a round and everyone has to shut their mouth as fast as they can and get back to nose breathing. So we'll open up the breathing because we practice it. Now we're going to shut it down and try to get people to focus on recovery. And if you just watch people's posture, body language, position in between rounds or in between sets, you'll see that they're not actually breathing at all. They're just panting, waiting for the feeling to get better. And there's a faster way to get better. And that's when we just are conscious of this whole thing. And one of the critiques I have of the modern exercise intensity is that people just retreat into the pain cave. They can't even count to 10. They have to mark chalk on the ground. They don't know where they are. They don't know where their athletes are. They're not aware of their feeling. They're just under the barbell, and the noise of the pain is so high, they can't actually hear and feel what's going on. And the application of that is not as effective. I want you to be very conscious of what's going on. And if you want to die and go into the pain cave, on the bike, you can do that, but you're still not going to be my best cyclist. My best cyclist can suffer and be very much aware of what's going on. So I just watched the World Championships in cross-country skiing, and there's a Russian right now, Bolshinov, who is so good. He is so fast. And he's competing against, it's the end of the 50K Classic, and he's competing against a Norwegian. So they've just skied 50 kilometers, 50 kilometers. They are the elite. And Bolshinov knows that the Norwegian is on the outside, so he just takes him to the outside. And then the Norwegian has to interfere with him in order to stay up and ends up getting disqualified for skiing out, and Bolshinov breaks his pole. And that's how aware Bolshinov is, because he's a student of the sport, and technically that in this competition, which is not just who can go the fastest, it's racing another human, he's aware enough to know that Bolshinov is on the outside, and all he has to do is take him to the outside. And he knows that this Norwegian can't pass him there. He basically stuffs him into the wall. And guess what? That wouldn't happen if Bolshinov wasn't conscious enough for him to be aware that he's actually racing, that he's making decisions. If he's so deep into the pain cave and can't handle that at the end of 50K, that doesn't happen, right? He maybe gets out sprinted by the Norwegian. And that's the consciousness we're trying to maintain. Look, your attention is going to drop, but I still need you to have attention. I still need you to be able to talk and take direction and be coached. And one of the ways that I can quickly make sure that you're aware and feeling that is that you can still breathe effectively, or you can be reminded to breathe more effectively.
Right. So would that mean that within the functional fitness community, we're basically way too often too deep in the pain cave?
It's potential. I think what you want to ask yourself is, can I feel my feet? So if I'm jerking, right, or push pressing, watch the variability in people's feet. Mm-hmm. I think it's not fair for us to say we're too deep in the pain cave. I think what we've said is chances are no one's told you this is important before. So once again, I'll say that, hey, I want you to jump with full foot pressure.
Right.
And then I want you to finish with full foot pressure. And so what ends up happening is that we stop worshiping at the doorstep of intensity, and we start worshiping the fact that it's our skill that's our limiting factor. Our athletes are going to make errors because that's why we're training. We're training to, great, you can push this barbell over your head, now do it fast. Now do it for more than 5 reps. And now do it when you're breathing hard. And now do it when you're tired. And now do it when you're competing, right? The person who has the best technique over the longest haul, which is why we're training. Otherwise, let's just take a bunch of drugs. Let's do a bunch of blood flow restriction. Let's get huge muscles and we'll call it good. But we know is that that's not the key. You have to move and practice being skilled under these conditions. We have to use fatigue to challenge robustness of position. But if our athletes can't feel when their technique goes, then we're just practicing who can do the most work the fastest. And then I'm like, well, who cares? Move that pile of rocks over there. And whoever does the most wins, right? So that's not maybe our most effective way of training. We've got to put the skill back in to what we're doing.
Awesome. So if I want to start, how do you start? Should I just go on the WOD and try to nose breathe, or is there a better way to start it?
Well, you know, our friend Brian McKenzie of Shift has some really interesting nose gearing about being where you are, because there's times where I need 90 minutes of just zone 2, very easy aerobic. You should be able to do that 100% nose breathing. Shut your mouth, breathe through your nose. Then the next gear might be, you know, nose in, nose out more powerfully. Then it might be in through the nose, out through the mouth, and then mouth, mouth. And so you can sort of use your breathing to judge your awareness. And you should have heard this before. People will say things like, in order, instead of just over maxing and redlining your engine, can you keep your tongue to the roof of your mouth when you're breathing hard? And if your tongue comes off your roof of your mouth, you know, that's a good indicator that you are going to the well. And what I'll tell you is, you know, as an example, Germany is very progressive in its electric mountain bikes. We're seeing electric bikes and electric mountain bikes everywhere. Cube has done a wonderful job. I work with Specialized, as you can see, and I'm a huge fan of electric mountain bikes, especially for older men,
right,
who instead of going straight to max heart rate and keeping it there, are suddenly being a lot more aerobic. And it doesn't mean they can't go redline, but if that's the only time you get all of your training, you're missing a bunch of aerobic adaptation, right? You're teaching yourself threat, sugar, redline. You can't work out as hard enough, often enough. Recovery is going to be more expensive. But suddenly we see that this introduction of the mountain bike, the electric mountain bike, means that people can get into the mountains and still be very aerobic, right? They can shift that onto that system. So the way to begin this is to, even just through this regulation of, hey, how does my breathing work when I'm mobilizing or down regulating? And then just bring some consciousness. So for example, if you're listening to this and you're sitting, go ahead and slouch forward. Just let it go. Let your back round, and then take a big breath. Notice your breath was in your chest and it wasn't anywhere near your diaphragm. Now watch this. Just get into a position where you can take more air in. So I didn't say sit up. I just said get into a position where you can take more air in. But automatically, you got yourself in a more organized position where you could breathe more effectively. Mm-hmm. So imagine that's you on the rowing machine or on the bike or on the ski erg. And what you'll see suddenly is that you can make some decisions about your organization and your position predicated on, can I take a big, powerful breath in this position, right? And what we're seeing is that when we just begin even those conversations, we can start to constrain the environment to have better outcomes. And that's really why we're training in the first place. Otherwise, we're just doing a whole bunch of work. We're making very, very big fires, but we're not doing anything with the fire.
Well, fair enough. Fair enough. Awesome. Kelly, we're nearing the 1 hour mark. And I guess that marks also the end of your time. Thanks a lot for making time for us again and letting me pick your brain. It's always good to see you, and I hope we can hopefully see you soon in person again.
Hopefully.
Definitely.
I will see. One of the things that we're hoping to do at the Fit Club in Munich there, is to have a 3-day training camp
Right.
towards the middle end of December. So not into Christmas, not into, but definitely into Glühwein season. So we'll have a little bit of, Glühwein and a little bit of exercise, but hopefully this year, letting everyone know that we're planning on doing a 3-day mini camp, which is just 4 or 5 exercises a day, 4 or 5 training sessions a day, a little bit of lecture, a little bit of fun, a little Brotzeit, right? It's not really Biergarten season, but we'll have the Obsta, we'll make it work. And, but I would love to have everyone in and just celebrate. Everyone should be vaccinated by then, can be safe by then, to go have a little training camp in Munich, awesome. Maybe towards the 2nd to 3rd week. So before Christmas. Yes. My whole family's coming out, but I want to have a little training session because I miss all my friends. So hopefully we'll see everyone there.
Yeah, hopefully. We will make sure to let the community know as soon as that starts.
That would be great.
All right. Well, thanks again. Say hi to Juliet. She remembers us though.
Oh, yes. Tschüss. I'll see you again.
Tschüss, Kelly. Dankeschön.
Bitteschön.